Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a founding member of one of the greatest rock bands of all time, Dire Straits. He played bass guitar and sang backing vocals throughout the entire duration of the band from 1977 to 1995, during which time they recorded 6 studio albums and 2 live albums and performed well over 1,000 concerts at major venues throughout the world on 6 world tours. Dire Straits sold a phenomenal 120 million albums. In fact, their album, Brothers in Arms, is one of the best-selling albums of all time. Dire Straits earned 6 Grammy Awards, 3 Brit Awards, 2 MTV Video Music Awards, and a Juno Award. In 1989, our guest, along with the band's lead vocalist and guitarist, Mark Knopfler, received the Ivor Novello Award for Outstanding Contribution to British Music. In 2009, Dire Straits received the Heritage Award, and in 2018, the band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Our guest has also had an impressive solo career with 8 studio albums, including Never Told a Soul, Glass, Streets of Heaven, Long Shadows, Beautiful You, and 2 live albums, including my favorite, Live in Les Baux de Provence, with the Celtic rock group Kunla and Greg Pearl. His latest album is simply entitled 8, and it's a collection of compelling songs reflecting both his musical roots and his strong vision of what really matters in life. After Dire Straits disbanded, our guest became heavily engaged in his other passion besides music. He's a renowned artist. His paintings have been displayed in some of the world's most prestigious galleries, and he's had solo exhibitions in London, New York, Sydney, and across Europe. Last year, he released his absorbing and poignant memoir, My Life in Dire Straits, which gives us a candid look inside the extraordinary journey of his life as a member of this legendary band. I'm delighted to welcome John Illsley to our show. John, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. I sort of a long list of achievements, which I don't really sort of think that I somehow, can relate to. It's a funny thing when you're in a band like that, you sort of take it slightly for granted, and you don't really think about all the awards and such like that go with it. But it's very nice to get recognized for all of that anyway.
And it was a pleasure to research it and to recount it today. John, I love your description of your childhood in the book. You said your youth was middle class, middle England, safe, happy, and comfortable, but a tad gray, unadventurous, and unimaginative. You said that when you started listening to American music on the radio, your reaction to it was intensely physical, and music became your emotional rescue. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think that, in a sense, growing up in Middle England, in a safe environment, it just wasn't stimulating enough on a number of levels, principally on an emotional level. And I think that when, like a lot of young men at that time, teenagers and such, when they first heard people like Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry, it had a sort of profound effect on us. And that sort of, in a sense, still resonates, because this is the essence of why we get into music and try and play a part in it, because it makes you feel something. And with me, music has always been that side of things, which is very important. The fact that it makes you feel something different from just having a conversation, for instance, like we're having now. Listening to music puts you on a different kind of plane. And also it has this wonderful universal element to it where it joins countries, nations, states together, different ages together. It spoke to me very clearly when I was young, and it's never really left me, to be honest.
You had a very interesting journey after leaving school. You couldn't get into art college. You couldn't get hired at Marks and Spencer, thank God. You only lasted a few weeks as a trainee bank clerk. Then you worked at a soup factory and almost lost a thumb. Then you worked at a timber company. Then you went back to school to study sociology. Can you remember the moment when you decided to pursue a music career?
Well, it's interesting when you talk about all those little aspects of one's life, because they all connect to create the next thing. I went to the bank because I was driving my parents mad drinking coffee at home. They said, get out of the house and go and get a job. Well, the bank accepted me. I hated it, left after 3 months. And then I got into the timber company. And when I was in that timber company, I met a lot of people that I'd never met before, really working class people, the root of the docks and such like in London. And it was a real eye-opener for a middle-class kid from England. And that's what made me want to go and do sociology at college. So you see, they're all connected. And so the decisions you make in life create the next chapter you're in. And so by getting into that college, I then got into this very, very basic, very rough council flat in South London, in Deptford, which is all now gentrified, of course. But then it was very, very rough. And then I needed a flatmate, and I met David Knopfler. So you see, none of this would have happened if I hadn't made certain decisions to keep pushing through. And music had always been with me since the age of 14, but I never really thought, and I'd played in lots of bands and stuff, never really thought as it being, if you like, something that I was going to pursue in the way that I did. And then when I met Mark, we just sort of, we just glued like that very quickly. And I think both of us sort of thought, oh, we might be able to do something with this.
What made you gravitate to the bass guitar rather than the lead guitar?
Most bass guitars are people who really wanted to be a lead guitar player in the band. Sometimes you're left with no option. If you wanted to join a rock and roll band, nobody really wanted to play the bass, to be honest. And I was so desperate to join the school band. I said, what else can I do? And they said, well, we haven't got a bass guitarist. And I went, oh God, and then suddenly realized when I started playing that instrument that was more me than anything else, than the piano, than the guitar, or God bless the violin. But that's really sat with me, and I thought, this is how I can contribute to music, is playing the bass.
I want to ask you, John, about your approach as a bass guitarist. In your book, you wrote, along with the drummer, it's my role to lay the solid foundation on which the guitars and vocals sit. Good playing is essentially about playing the notes as they feel right in the moment and for the song. I keep it really simple. Where did that philosophy come from?
Well, I couldn't say it better myself.
And you did.
Well, I think that I've always loved songwriters. So to me, the principal element in being a bass player was to try and make that song work as best as possible, rather than to fill all the spaces. Just to play what was, I know it sounds crazy, it was just to play what was necessary. And the other person that I looked at for that actually was John McVie from Fleetwood Mac. If you listen to the Fleetwood Mac songs, he doesn't play all over the track. He just has little flourishes here and there, but it just sits with exactly what is necessary to the song. And being a songwriter myself, I understand that process. And I often, I mean, it sounds crazy this, but when I put the track down, I usually play a guitar when I'm doing my tracks, and then put the bass on afterwards and redo the drums. I mean, it's a kind of a weird way of doing it, but that's the way I find. But you've got to have a very firm bass to sit a song on. And I don't know how modern music's made, because it's a completely different process now than the way that we used to make it. With computers, it's made now and such like. And so, but I think the principle still remains the same. The track's got to have a solid bass to be on, and I'm quite good at doing that, I think.
Now, as you know, 1978 was the big breakthrough year for Dire Straits. Mark Knopfler has said many times that you were all very lucky that you were not teenagers when Dire Straits made it big. Do you agree?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I think it would have got slightly out of hand if we'd been 18 or 19 years old, to be honest. The fact that we'd all, been around the block a bit and done different things, like working in a timber yard with dockers and going to university and learning sociology and philosophy gives you a bit more of a broader spectrum about life.
And maturity.
Maturity, yeah, that's a good word. Not often used when you're in your mid-20s. Yes, I think that we approached it in a way that felt right to us, and we weren't a traditional rock and roll band that started throwing things out of windows and such like, and taking a lot of narcotics. I don't know. The music was all absorbing, and because Mark was writing such extraordinary songs, even from the word go, and then they developed even more as we went on, and producing things like Romeo and Juliet and Ton of Love and Money for Nothing and Brothers in Arms. I mean, when you're working with that kind of material, there's a certain intensity to it, which if you're going out and getting stoned all the time, you're kind of going to miss the trick, and so it's not a question of just being, in inverted commas, sensible. It's kind of just being realistic about what you're trying to achieve. And as you've read the book, and anybody who does read the book, you realize that we did an awful lot of touring, a lot of concerts, and you have to really concentrate on keeping yourself fit and able to do the work, because you're playing for 2.5 hours a night in front of a lot of people who've spent a lot of money. It's very difficult getting into a 50,000 size seater or 20,000 seater auditorium. People make a big effort, and so as far as I was concerned and Mark was concerned, if they made a big effort, we'll make a big effort, and so we'll do the damn best concerts we can. And I think we achieved that. I think we're very proud of the fact that we kept a really, really high standard. Anybody who came to see the band would see a really great concert.
Oh, there's no question about that. You always said that you believed your music had a distinct British sound. So did it bother you, John, that many people believed Dire Straits was an American band?
That was quite amusing, because when we first went to America and we opened our mouths on the radio, they said, "Oh, gee, we thought you guys were Yanks." And we said, no, sorry to disappoint you, but I think yes, I mean, I think because we listened to a lot of American music and a lot of different kinds of music, that influences how you play. So you bring all that to bear almost unconsciously sometimes. And so that's really what made the Straits sound. But in a sense, in the early days, when it was just a four-piece, playing off Mark's guitar style was really the principal driving element to how we worked together. And then obviously it developed differently over the next few albums and such like, as to what we have now, which is a much bigger picture of the Dire Straits history or story or whatever. But it's a bit like if you're a painter, and you mentioned that I paint a bit, and I do, because it's another form of communication which I enjoy immensely, a different form of communication. And almost without realizing it, if you're interested in art, you tend to sort of beg, borrow and steal wherever you can and make it yours. And that's what happens with music too. I think you can't avoid it.
Your second album, Communique, was recorded in the Bahamas. Your third and fourth albums, Making Movies and Love Over Gold, were recorded in New York. The Brothers in Arms album was recorded on the Caribbean island of Montserrat. Do you think the location of where you recorded your albums affected the distinct sound and feel of the music?
To an extent, yes. And it would be interesting to have made Communique in New York. But, Communique does have that sort of Caribbean island feel, that slightly laid back sort of approach. The songs would have probably been different. I think we wanted to be the first album was recorded in an urban environment in London, in Basing Street. I think it was partly because the Communique album was recorded at a particular studio, which, the Compass Point studio. Jerry Wexler, who produced Communique, was interested in working in Compass Point studio. So that's the reason why we went there. And then, making movies, it just felt appropriate because we're with Jimmy Iovine, and he was working in the power station, and we went to visit the power station, and it felt good. And we thought, okay, this is where this one should be made. And it worked so well. We did Love Over Gold there as well. So I think that the urban energy does affect things, gives it a little bit more edge. But by the time we'd got to Brothers in Arms, I think we sort of knew what we were doing as far as, so I don't think it would have mattered that much where that album was made, to be honest. I think we'd got an idea of how we were going to make that work.
John, as you know only too well, with success in the music business comes fame. Mark Knopfler has been very vocal about how difficult it was for him to be so famous. Looking back, how do you think you coped with your fame?
Well, I think that in some ways you have to make the distinction between the front man of a band and somebody who's maybe slightly more in the shadows. I did feel for Mark on that subject, because yes, he got a lot of attention, and quite a bit of it was, unwanted. I mean, he's a very private man, and he feels that what he does with his music is enough, and he doesn't really like to talk about it too much. Although I think he's talking about it a little bit more now. I think fame is a tricky one. I think if you search it out, and you really you want to be famous, that's one thing. But it does, as you say, it has problems with it, because suddenly you're not private anymore. You can't go down to the shops and buy a packet of fags, or go into a pub and have a beer. Oh, hello, aren't you so and so, and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, I own the local pub down here, and everybody leaves me completely alone because they know me very well. But I think fame is, I think he described it once quite well. He said success is fantastic, and he and I really did enjoy the success of the band, don't get me wrong. But he said success is like a really nice car, but what comes out of the exhaust pipe is fame.
That's very well put. Very well put.
So, that's the sort of the dirty side of it, really, in a way.
You provide a lot of insight in your book about the experience of touring. I want to read you something that you wrote. You said, "The twin pressures of rapid success and the exhaustion of long back-to-back tours have broken hundreds of bands over the years. There was no time to take stock, to adjust, to share and discuss how we were all coping. You just bang on from one show to the next, go home, crash out and decompress for a few days, put in some TLC with your long-suffering wife or girlfriend, and then you're back in the studio or on the road." But John, despite all of that, I got the distinct feeling from your book that there's something addictive about touring. Am I right?
Yes, in a word. It's an extraordinary experience, because how I describe it in the book, it's like a family. And so you end up really being a successful rock and roll band. You end up being in two different families: your musical touring family, or your recording family, and then when you get home with your wife and children or girlfriend. And making those adjustments is really, really difficult, and it's almost impossible for your spouse or your girlfriend to fully comprehend it. And how can they? I mean, suddenly this sort of semi-stranger, because there were no mobile phones in those days, making long distance calls would cost a fortune. So you didn't really communicate all the time like you do now. And so you've got this, you feel sort of slightly displaced when you get home, and you've sort of got to reignite, that other family. And then suddenly the phone rings and say, by the way, the car's picking you up in about half an hour to go to the studio. And you go, sorry, I've got to go. And so there's a lot of casualties in the music business because of that. But touring is, playing live is as I said it before, it's somewhat better than sex sometimes. It's I don't know if you can put that on the radio, but it's a very, very powerful force. And that's why a lot of big bands and artists find it very difficult to give it up. Because it's a wonderful relationship between the audience and yourself and the band you're in. That energy is extraordinary. It's magical, and that's the reason why I go and do a few dates now and again still today. Because it pleases me very much to have that feeling.
You wrote about the enormous toll that your relentless touring schedule took on your personal life as a husband and father. Looking back, are there things that you would have done differently once the band became such an enormous success?
I mean, the simple answer probably is no, because you are really guided by the energy that's existing at the time. And in a sense, you either go with that energy and that flow, or you get off the train. It's like a snowball. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's one of the reasons why in 1992 Mark and I decided to after that massive tour, to say, okay, I think we've done enough now, and let's just thank our lucky stars that we're still intact and still talking to each other. And but it's a very difficult thing to deal with. I mean, to say what I would have done it differently would be a bit disingenuous, really. I think. I mean, you just have to. Some people love success. They love that experience, and I loved it. As I said, I didn't like the fame element, but I didn't get too much of that, which is good. But it's not for everybody. I mean, and Pick Withers left after the Love Over Gold album was made, and he said, I've kind of had enough. I don't want to go on these endless tours anymore. And for a drummer, it was incredibly tiring. So he made that decision, and he's still drumming today. So, he's all right.
Over the years, several documentaries were made about Dire Straits. The BBC made one in 1980, and you all seemed so frazzled and even morose, except for Pick. And then a few years later, Paula Yates made a documentary about you in Jerusalem. I'm wondering what goes through your mind when you watch those films now.
Well, I did actually, not during lockdown. I think I took a bit of a look at that Arena program. I think you're talking about in 1980. I think it's very difficult to explain to anybody how intense those first 2 or 3 years were for the band. It was kind of explosive, and it's very difficult to keep up with what was happening to you in a psychological balanced way, if you like, because you're getting so much coming at you so very quickly, and suddenly you're not playing in front of 500 people. Suddenly there's 5,000 people turn up, and somebody says there's another 2,000 people outside. You say, what is going on? So all this incredible pressure on the band to keep itself sane. And I think in that 1980 thing, you can see, David was struggling with it. Yeah, we all were to a certain extent, because it was, my God, it was something new. I mean, we'd never experienced it before. And I think you just get better after a while at dealing with all the issues that come at you, which are endless. And then you're more relaxed about it, I think. But that documentary did catch us at a rather morose time, thinking, oh my God, this is really tough.
You described Dave Knopfler's departure from the band as the stuff of Shakespearean tragedies. John, with the passage of time and looking back, do you think there could have been any way to prevent the rupture in the relationship between Dave and Mark Knopfler?
I don't think so. They're very different characters. And I think the brother thing really, I suppose, is the issue. But all I can say about band dynamics is that it's very important that you know where you fit into that dynamic, and if you feel that you don't fit in, you have to kind of work that out. And if you can't work it out, then you have to leave. And the dynamics of bands can be quite stressful. They can be quite difficult to handle. Navigate, yes, good word. And I think that, the Shakespearean thing, it was a tragedy, because for me, David was my friend. We were, apart from playing in a band together, we were mates. We'd known each other for 3 or 4 years quite intensely. But it was I don't think that dynamic with him in the band was ever really going to work. So I don't think it would have been any different. It would have had the same outcome, maybe just a little bit further down the line, But as I said to you, it's very important for members of bands, in order that they don't feel that they're not getting their just rewards or whatever, you have to know what it means, what your place is in that situation, and what you can contribute to it. And because it was very successful, nobody should have really complained about anything, to be frank, from that point of view. But personalities occasionally clash, and you have to. I think probably, if nothing else, I'm quite good at finding out what works and how to hold things together. So I think I felt that some of that was a bit of my role in the band's dynamics, was to sort of keep things, on a level playing field, so that everybody we could all work together, and nothing got out of hand.
You were the diplomat.
Yes. I mean, my wife says you should be prime minister, but she's always joking when she says that.
Over the years, there were several changes in the personnel of the band, but you and Mark stayed right to the end. Were there times, John, when you considered leaving the band?
No, never. No. I always considered it was, it was my destiny to be in that situation.
And we're all grateful that you did, believe me.
Well, I mean, there's something really sort of magical about a long-term friendship and working friendship, which I often reflect on, because, I do hear things about other bands, which I'm not going to mention, where things go terribly wrong for all sorts of reasons. And I feel kind of, it's such a shame, because there you are, you're working together on the most wonderful projects, musical projects, and having the time of your life, really. It's the best game in town, really, apart from, painting pictures. That's the other thing. But so, I was very fortunate that, that Mark and I agreed on how we were going to make this thing work. Well,
I don't think you give yourself enough credit for what I said earlier, maturity. You have, and you had, a real innate sense of maturity, fairness, even-temperedness that really kept the band in balance. All of us fans could see it.
Well, that's kind of you to say so. I mean, I think our manager said to me once, he said, I think he was probably slightly joking. He said, you do realize this band wouldn't be here if you weren't in it. And I said, well, it takes a group of people to make a group, and everybody has to have that, has to understand the dynamics of things. And some people can't.
Well, you talked about knowing the role that you play in the band, but you also have to understand the role that the other members of the band play. And there has to be that mutual respect, and jealousy cannot play a part. And you just have that very comfortable personality that you could feel it. We in the audience, believe me, we could feel you were the glue holding that band together.
Well, jealousy is a really poisonous quality, isn't it? I mean, it's a killer. it kills everything. It kills creativity. It kills friendships. It's just not healthy. And some people, they feel jealous of somebody else, and it's kind of crazy. I mean, if you're in a band like this, you've got a wonderful songwriter. He needs as much help as he can get, really, to make that dream come true, not just for himself, but for all those people around the world who listen to Romeo and Juliet and go, "Oh God, that's good." So it's just you got to know how to play your part, really.
I think it was well known at the time that the song Brothers in Arms was inspired by the Falklands War, but now it's being played in conjunction with the war in the Ukraine. John, it must be so gratifying to you and Mark that this mournful song about the futility of war is still as relevant today as it ever was.
Well, I think it's probably one of the most important songs that Mark wrote and that we played. And just as an aside here, we have this organization in the UK called the SAS, which is the Army Special Services, and we have an organization called the SBS, which is the boat service, which is a very small amount of select men. And I had the honor of being asked to come and play Brothers in Arms in front of 800 people gathered in a hotel in support of the SBS a few years ago, 1919, with the whole brass band from the Navy on stage. We'd be playing the chords of Brothers in Arms, and it was an extraordinary experience for me. I played that song not a million times, but an awful lot. But having this brass band behind me just playing those mournful chords was like, oh my God, this is different. And speaking to people in the forces about the importance of that song when they're away from home in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and all these other crazy follies that go on around the world, and now Ukraine, I get it completely. They feel connected in a way which we mentioned earlier, the connectedness of music. For the armed forces, that song is really incredibly important.
Oh, absolutely. Of all the concerts you did with Dire Straits, there are two that really stand out for me, and they were both at Wembley Stadium. Live Aid, where you had the longest set of any act, it was 20 minutes, and the Nelson Mandela 70th birthday tribute concert, which is widely considered to have hastened Nelson Mandela's release from prison. Did those events have a profound emotional impact on you?
It's almost, yes, of course. I mean, I think when the relevance of what people were trying to achieve, especially with Live Aid, with Geldof was trying to achieve with Live Aid and pulled it off. I think there was a sort of universal awareness of a problem in the world which needed to be addressed, and I think that all the musicians and artists that performed on that day felt the same. They felt this profound emotional relevance to what was going on, and it was an incredible achievement. And when you say we had one of the longest sets, it was only 2 songs actually. I think it was Money for Nothing and Sultans of the Swing. We're quite good at playing long songs. But the Mandela thing, I don't know whether it hastened his release, but it was a celebration really of his birthday more than anything else. And it was an extraordinary array of other artists on that day that was brought together. And also for us, it was a particular joy because Eric Clapton was playing guitar with us, because our guitar player's wife, I think, was having babies in Los Angeles or something. And Eric stepped forward and he said, I just want to play rhythm guitar. I don't want to be up front. And he sat back, he stood back in the audience and just smiled most of the time. He was just strumming a few chords. And that was rather lovely.
The thing about Live Aid and the Mandela tribute was that they exemplified the power of music to unify and create solidarity for a common cause. That really came through.
That's right, exactly right. And there's this sort of this the universal power of it. And generally speaking, with the if I dare say it, with the English language, that and how relevant that is to how people understand the essence of rock and roll music, and blues music and such like that. All these combinations of folk and R&B and goodness knows what else. All these things come together and provide a sort of, how would one could put it? I mean, I could just use the word energy again. I do use it a lot, but that energy that music has to pull people together. And also you can have that when you're on your own, just listening to an album and just let it flow through you. And it's the most wonderful thing. It's difficult to describe it because it is such a powerful thing, and putting words to it seems a bit slightly sort of irrelevant, really, because we all feel it and we know it, and that's enough.
I want to also mention, John, that Dire Straits donated all South African royalties from the sale of their first album to Amnesty International. That was a very significant thing to do back in those days. I want to commend you and your fellow band members for doing that.
Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, and it still seems like a good idea. They were quite angry, I have to say. The South African authorities, they weren't well pleased. But of course, they banned the music on the radio, which of course made it even more popular. If you ban something, of course, everybody wants to listen to it, as we know. So it's a silly thing to ban anything. You just have to accept that it is what it is. It's a shame now, because I know a few people in South Africa who, they say it's the place is struggling again.
Yes.
Politically struggling again. I mean, it's such a wonderful country. I mean, it's just such a shame. Or, this political kind of infighting and, oh my goodness me, tribal stuff going down. And I don't know, maybe some things are just insolvable in this world. I don't know.
At least at this stage there, for sure. Now, Dire Straits stopped touring in 1992, but even before then, you released 2 solo albums. And since then, you've released another 6 albums. Tell me about your collaboration with Greg Pearl and the Celtic rock group Kunla.
Well, when we stopped touring in 1992, I essentially hung the bass up for a while and really concentrated on painting. I just wanted to sort of just get away from everything for a bit, and then I was up in Leicestershire visiting a friend of mine, and there was this Irish group playing in this pub in the Leicestershire countryside, and they said, "Oh, John, why don't you get up and come and play with us?" So I got on stage and hit a few chords out and all the rest of it, and suddenly I thought, well, this is quite good fun again. And so I invited them to come down to play, and then they invited me over to Ireland to play, and that was fairly exhausting, because they like to have a few drinks before they used to go on stage, to put it mildly. And I thought, if I keep playing with these guys, my liver's going to probably explode. But I managed to keep them sober for that one concert in Les Beaux, which you talked about earlier. And I said to them, right, you've got to play this gig sober. And they said, oh no, we've never done that in our lives. No, we don't do that, John. And I said, you do tonight. After the show, you can drink whatever you like, but I'm recording this, and I don't want you to mess it up. And they, after the gig, they said, oh my God, that was fantastic. We managed to do a gig without having a drink. So, good for you. Yeah. Anyway, they did misbehave themselves massively after the show, I have to add, in this little French village. But anyway, we won't go into the details of that.
I want to ask you about John Illsley, the artist. You were profoundly impacted by Brett Whitley, the famous Australian artist. You described him as both sophisticated and coarse, wild and dangerous, but thoughtful and kind, a drunk, junkie angel with the tongue of a viper, the sensitivity of a toddler, and the ice-cold heart of an artist on a mission. In what ways did he inspire you as an artist?
Well, that pretty much says it all, what you just read out. I mean, in a sense, he was the consummate energy for art. I mean, he took risks, constantly took risks with everything. I mean, with his body as well, because he did suffer from heroin addiction for many years, and in fact, it created his demise, as it turns out, at too young an age. But he was an extraordinary person to be around, because he just saw the world in a different way that I'd never experienced before. And he was quite an unlikely person to become a good friend. He was a difficult friend to have because of his addiction. You never quite knew where you were sometimes. But the way that he saw possibilities of pictorial extravagance, if you like, in his work and in other people's work. I mean, he introduced me to a lot of people I'd never heard of, like de Kooning and Richard Diebenkorn and Klein and all those abstract expressionists and stuff, which influenced him greatly. But first and foremost, he was the most extraordinary draftsman, and he'll be remembered for his line, you know. And so I think what he did for me was he kickstarted me into realizing that actually I could paint, and I could draw, and I could enjoy the, if you like, the possibility of making a good picture, which is not easy. I've discovered the more I do it, the less it's easy. But I approach art, I think, a little bit like he did. If he taught me nothing else, he said, you've always got to try and surprise yourself. And I've always held that in view. If I'm looking at a picture and it's not making me feel anything, I block it out and start again. I hit it again, because if it's not surprising me and giving me the right kind of feeling, it's not going to do it with anybody else. And he taught me that. He was a remarkable artist. He was wonderful, a wonderful man, extraordinary man. If you went around an art gallery with Brett Whiteley, you knew more about what was going in that art gallery than anybody else could have shown you. It was wonderful.
I know you've said that painting for you, John, is therapeutic. Do you think your painting and your songwriting and your recording and performing reflect a need inside you to connect and communicate with people and to express yourself?
Well, I was thinking about this morning. I don't quite know why. Probably because I had a sort of mild hangover from my son's birthday last night. But so I was a bit slow, and I was just thinking about how one writes an album, how one deals with one's sense of creativity, not in a sort of magnanimous way, but in the practical way of how things come together. And I keep notebooks with me pretty much all the time. So whenever I have a thought or an idea about something, a title of a song, a line, you know, a metaphor or a simile, I write it down. And suddenly, so I've got loads and loads of notebooks around me that have got all this sort of jumbled up ideas and nonsense. And gradually, if you go through the flow of the book, suddenly songs emerge out of all this nonsense. And suddenly you and I don't really know how the process works, apart from it's a process of elimination. And I suppose in a way, discipline, just constantly working on an idea to try and make something work. And I really enjoyed this last record that I've done, 8, because I felt that I was getting better at writing. And I was really more pleased with this one than I have for a while. Because we started it during lockdown, you know, we were all locked in houses and stuff. And I started the book in lockdown. So I was quite busy when we were all shut up and couldn't go out. I was very busy. But the creative process is interesting. I mean, with the picture, you start with a blank canvas, and with a song, you start with a blank canvas. It's just a different way of communicating, as you said earlier.
Well, you're very gifted to be able to communicate in so many mediums. I want to also mention your work with the children's charity Life Education, which was integrated into Coram, one of the oldest charities in the UK. You're very committed to warning young people about the perils of drug addiction and substance abuse. And yet, as far as I know, you never suffered from alcoholism or drug addiction yourself. Why does this cause resonate with you so much?
Well, I think it just made a lot of sense to me that if you show young people, children or whatever, even from a quite early age, that certain things will probably harm them, they might possibly avoid them. I mean, it's difficult because it's in the very nature of human beings for us to experiment with life. That's just a fact. But it just made sense to me that if you can actually redirect somebody away from, if you like, started smoking at 11 or 12 years old, which I did, away from that, and also away from, eating the wrong things and then eating the right things, then you've got a possibility of having a more healthy sort of individual on your hands. And because there's no doubt about it, we are entering we have entered a place now, certainly in the UK, where drugs seem to be pretty normal, and everybody knows almost knows how to balance things out. I mean, when I was growing up, I don't think I didn't smoke any weed until I was 24, I don't think. Which now, I mean, that was like, it's different. So I think that this charity, if nothing else, can probably help children to arm themselves a little bit against the possibility of falling off the bus, and hurting themselves. Let's hope so.
I sure hope so. And I commend you for the work you're doing. John, you've had some amazing experiences in your career. I just want you to sit back and listen for a moment to some of these highlights. You played at the Roxy in Hollywood for an audience that included Rod Stewart, Stevie Nicks, Linda Ronstadt, and you got to hang out with Bob Dylan afterwards. You played on Tina Turner's recording of Private Dancer. When you played at Madison Square Garden in New York, you were joined on stage by Billy Joel and David Sanborn. You've also played on stage with Bob Dylan, Sting, Pete Townsend, Eric Clapton, Phil Collins, Elton John, Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, and David Bowie. You sat with Princess Diana at Grosvenor House for a life education function, and your son James presented her with a bouquet of flowers. John, are there times that you have to pinch yourself to believe that you actually experienced all of that?
Well, you see, I don't really think about those kind of. I mean, if I think about it, it's kind of like, well, that was pretty unusual, to be in that situation. I just feel extremely fortunate that those things have happened. I mean, standing behind Paul McCartney, playing bass on "I Saw Her Standing There" was a surreal moment, I must say. But there's a wonderful thing about musicians. They do love playing together, and and playing with different people, and it's a wonderful thing. I mean, I suppose I should pinch myself sometimes and just shut up, basically, just accept the fact that it's been quite an interesting life.
Well, I hope you soaked it all in when it was happening, because these moments, and I only touched the surface, but they're surreal.
Yeah. Well, they are a bit, really. I mean, I don't know what to say about it, really, apart from that these things happen, and I suppose really it happens because of the success of what you're part of, and so I mean these are the perks, if you like, about getting it right.
That's a good way to put it. They're perks of getting it right.
Yeah.
I want to tell our viewers that you can learn more about John Illsley and his music, his concert schedule, and his paintings by going to his website, johnillsley.com. In addition to his albums, paintings, and prints, you can also buy his 2 DVDs, Live at the Brook and Life and Times of Dire Straits. Well, John, I have to thank you for all the beautiful music and incredible concerts you've brought us over the years. It's been an immense honor having this opportunity to interview you. Thank you so much for taking the time to appear on our show.
Well, Harvey, it's a pleasure to meet you. No, it's been very nice to talk to you, I have to say. Lovely. Thank you for having me.
Our guest has been legendary musician John Illsley. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you to my team in LA and the UK. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.